Before musical notation, melodies were memorized or improvised. Manuscripts of early liturgical chants or lyric verse give only the texts, but gradually signs began to be added above the words and a means of notating music was developed. Welcome to Music History Podcast by Viola Studio channel. Writing melody. In the early medieval church, the clergy responsible for music and divine worship were faced with the problem of memorizing an ever-growing repertoire of chant melodies that needed to be consistent throughout the monasteries of a specific order or the churches in a particular diocese. Studies have shown that the capacity for memorization in the Middle Ages was vast. Widespread illiteracy, and the fact that the production of manuscripts was confined to monasteries, meant that oral transmission of music was the norm. The task was daunting, as Otto, second abbot of the Benedictine monastery of Cluny in France, explained.
No amount of time is enough to reach such perfection of study that we can learn even the smallest antiphon, without the labor of a master, and if we happen to forget it, there is no way in which we can recover our memory of it.
A series of signs, the neumes, placed above the text, was developed to serve as a memory aid for the choirmasters and singers. Initially, these neumes were essentially inflective marks. A graphic representation of syllabic stress and the rise and fall of the voice, but gradually they became more sophisticated and could indicate quite complex groupings of notes. The basic forms of the neumes were the dot, punctum, a vertical or oblique line, virga, and squiggles of diverse forms in which several pitches were bound together, ligatures. Different pneumatic systems were developed in the various chant regions, but all increasingly tended to represent pitch through the height of the neumes. The revolutionary stave. The use of heightened neumes to indicate relative pitch between one note and the next quite soon attracted the scribal device of a horizontal line, initially imagined in the copyist's eye and then represented by an inked line on the page. In Italy, Guido of Arezzo had experienced firsthand in his monastery the difficulties faced by monks and clergy in memorizing the chant repertoire. He devised a stave of 4 horizontal lines, an invention that proved to be a distinctive feature of the Western musical tradition and a huge leap for musical composition. In addition to the accurate notation of pitch, the stave allowed for the clear alignment of simultaneously sounding pitches, which made it an important graphic tool for the notation of early polyphony. Guido claimed, justifiably, that his new system of musical notation would reduce the lifetime of study needed to learn the chant repertoire to just 2 years, so that monks would have more time for prayer and other duties.
I have determined to notate this antiphona, so that any intelligent and diligent person can learn a chant.
Notation also meant that the chant melodies would remain pure, since they could be clearly encoded through the use of the stave and correctly transmitted in written form, together with the corresponding liturgical texts. Guido also developed a teaching method in which he mapped pitches onto the human hand. His system of 7 interlocking 6-note scales, hexachords, described the entire gamut of the vocal range, with each note marked on a different part of the hand, starting with the bottom note on the thumb. When coaching musicians, Guido could point to the relevant joint to indicate the note to be sung. Guido of Arezzo. Guido of Arezzo is regarded as the inventor of modern notation through his use of a 4-line stave, and of the hexachord system taught through the Guidonian hand, see above right. He became a monk of the Benedictine order at the monastery of Pomposa near Ferrara. His reputation as a teacher was rapidly established, but the hostility this fame aroused in his fellow monks caused Guido to move to Arezzo, where he wrote his highly influential treatise on music entitled Micrologus in about 1025. His teaching method attracted the attention of Pope John XIX. It is thought Guido went to Rome at the Pope's invitation in 1028, but returned to Arezzo because of poor health. Nothing is known of him after 1033. Monastic manuscripts. The scriptoria of medieval monasteries, with their teams of highly trained scribes, were ideally placed to record chant melodies through notation. A particularly important center for the production of chant books using heightened neumes was the Benedictine Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, founded in the first half of the 8th century. There the scribe and teacher Notker the Stammerer, who was responsible for the copying of the liturgical books, compiled a large anthology of sequences, chants or hymns sung during the liturgy. Another major center of scribal activity was the Benedictine Abbey of Cluny in central France, founded in 909 by William of Aquitaine. The community at Cluny grew substantially during the 11th century, partly due to sizable donations from the kings of Leon and Castile in Spain. Cluniac foundations and influence stretched throughout Western Europe, from the Isle of Lewis in Scotland to northern Spain, and its manuscripts were distributed to other Cluniac houses. A Cluny codex. The illuminated manuscript known as the Codex Calixtinus, preserved at the Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in northwest Spain, was probably copied in Cluny. Dating from the mid-12th century, the Codex was an anthology of sermons and liturgical texts for pilgrims. It contains monophonic melodies copied on a 4-line stave, which is elegantly drawn in red ink, as well as early examples of 2-voice polyphony notated on 2 vertically aligned staves. After accurate musical notation paved the way for more complex compositions and musical innovation. Toward the end of the 13th century, a system of notating rhythm, it was developed by music theorists such as Franco of Cologne that enabled the composition of more complex music. Thank you for listening to Music History Podcast by Viola Studio channel. Please leave us your comments and opinions.